The newspaper ad had promised a refined Texas rancher. Instead, Juliette Duval found herself staring down the barrel of a shotgun. Rain lashed the broken carriage as Juliette clutched her carpetbag, the ink on her train ticket bleeding into oblivion. The driver had fled an hour ago when the outlaws appeared, leaving her stranded with nothing but her mother's Bible and the crumpled matrimonial notice that had lured her west. Seeking virtuous lady of musical ability for respectable rancher. Object, matrimony. Reply to box 217. A gun cocked. Hands up, fancy. Juliette raised trembling fingers, just as thunder cracked and a horse burst through the storm. The outlaw whirled, but not fast enough. A rope snaked around his wrists, yanking him backward. The figure atop the midnight stallion moved like vengeance itself, his duster flaring as he dismounted. You all right, ma'am? Juliette's breath caught. Emerald eyes. A jaw carved from granite. This was no ordinary cowboy. I'm here to meet Everett Blackwood, she stammered. The man froze. Who the hell told you that name? From her soaked pocket she produced the ad. His tanned face paled as he read it. Clara, he muttered. Then louder, my sister's idea of a joke. You'll be on the next train east. Lightning flashed, illuminating the gold band on his left hand. Widower? Before she could ask, he'd lifted her onto his horse, his touch scorching even through the rain. Juliette gripped the saddle horn. God had brought her here for a reason. Even if this stubborn rancher refused to see it. The piano was out of tune. Just like this marriage that wasn't. Juliette's fingers hovered over the yellowed keys in Blackwood Ranch's parlor. The instrument hadn't been played in years. Dust clouded the pedals and a family of mice had nested in the bench. Behind her, Everett leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over his broad chest. Don't bother. It's been broken since, his voice caught. Since my mother died. Juliette pressed middle C. The note wheezed like a dying man's breath. Play anyway, he challenged. Her hands found the opening chords of Great is Thy Faithfulness. The discord made Everett wince, but she played on, pouring every shattered hope into the music. The song she performed at her father's funeral. The hymn that had kept her warm in the St. Louis orphanage. A floorboard creaked. Everett stood beside her now, his calloused finger pointing to a stained key. That one stuck for Mama too. Juliette dared to meet his gaze. Why did your sister send for me? The ranch bell clanged outside, saving him from answering. But as he strode away she noticed, his shoulders were no longer braced for battle. And the F-sharp? Rang true. The boy's fingers were quicker than a rattlesnake's strike, but Juliette had known hunger too. The scent of hay and animal sweat clung to the rodeo grounds as Juliette adjusted her bonnet, the Texas sun baking the back of her neck. Everett had brought her to town under protest. You'll fry like an egg in that fancy dress, he'd grumbled, but she'd insisted on seeing the world beyond Blackwood Ranch. A flash of movement caught her eye. Near the chuck wagon, a dirt-streaked boy, no older than 10, ducked between cowboys. His too-large shirt flapped as he moved, swift as a shadow. Juliette's breath hitched when she saw the glint in his hand. Her mother's locket, the one she'd tucked in her pocket that morning. Stop, thief. A rancher grabbed for the boy, but he twisted free, crashing straight into Everett's chest. Everett's hand clamped on the child's shoulder. Let's see what you've got there, pup. The boy spat like a feral cat, but Everett merely turned him around, prying open grimy fingers. The locket, its rose gold tarnished, the miniature of Juliette's parents still intact, gleamed in the sunlight. Juliette expected anger. Instead, Everett knelt, bringing himself eye level with the trembling child. What's your name? Finn. The boy's voice was hoarse. Ain't got no last name. Everett's thumb brushed over the boy's protruding wrist bone. Juliette recognized that look, her own reflection in the orphanage mirror years ago. She stepped forward, her skirts whispering through the dust. It's all right, she said softly, taking the locket. Then, to Everett's visible shock, she pressed it back into Finn's palm. But next time ask. I'd have shared my lunch too. Finn's eyes, one blue, one green, widened. You ain't gonna turn me in? Everett stood, his gaze locking with Juliette's over the boy's head. Something unspoken passed between them. Reckon not, Everett said gruffly. But stealing's a poor trade. How'd you like to earn honest wages? The piano tuner arrived on the same day the schoolhouse lumber did, and Everett Blackwood was nowhere to be found. Juliette balanced on the porch rail, squinting at the horizon. 3 weeks had woven them into an unlikely family. Finn shadowed Everett like a colt learning to gallop, while Juliette had turned the ranch's neglected library into a classroom for the Hands children. But Everett had been distant since the rodeo, disappearing at dawn and returning after dark, his boots caked with mud from parts unknown. "Look, Miss Juliette." Finn's voice carried from the barn, where he practiced roping on a sawhorse. "I almost got it." She smiled as the lariat grazed the target, then froze at the crunch of wagon wheels. A wiry man in spectacles waved from the driver's seat. "Piano tuner, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood sent for me." The piano. That broken relic Everett claimed was beyond repair. Inside the parlor, the tuner whistled. "Fine instrument. Needs new felts, bridle straps." His fingers danced over the keys. But the heart's still strong. Juliette touched the sheet music Everett had left on the bench. "Be thou my vision." The ink was fresh. A commotion outside sent her rushing to the window. A wagon piled high with pine lumber rolled into the yard, followed by Everett astride his stallion, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms slick with sweat. Finn whooped and ran to meet him. "He's been cutting timber at the North 40, Clara murmured, appearing beside Juliette with a tray of lemonade. "For his schoolhouse project. Wouldn't even let me tell you." Juliette's throat tightened as she watched Everett kneel in the dirt, sketching plans for Finn. Sunlight gilded his profile, catching the scar on his temple, a souvenir from protecting his mother's land, Clara had confided. That night, the first clear notes of the repaired piano floated through the ranch house. Everett stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands as Juliette played. Finn slept curled on the settee, the locket, now his, glistening against his sunburnt throat. Everett's voice was rough as he quoted Proverbs. "She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue." Juliette's fingers stilled. "You've been reading." A shrug. "Had to see what all the fuss was about." Outside, fireflies winked over the fields like stars come down to bless this patch of earth. The piano, the schoolhouse, the boy, none of it had been in her advertisement. But Juliette knew with sudden certainty that God had written this story long before she'd answered that ad. The first drop of blood landed on the auction ledger like a crimson period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. The Abilene Cattle Exchange buzzed with the energy of 100 ranchers, their boots scuffing sawdust as they hollered bids over the lowing of longhorns. Juliette fanned herself with Everett's folded price list, the July heat pressing against her new yellow calico like a second skin. Beside her, Everett stood statue still, his black Stetson shadowing his face as he tracked lot number 217, a prime Blackwood heifer. "Going once, twice." 500, Everett growled, silencing the crowd. A murmur rippled through the barn. The bid was double the going rate. Finn, perched on the railing behind them, kicked his boots excitedly. "We're gonna?" Everett's cough cut him off. At first, Juliette thought it was dust. Then it came again, wetter, deeper. When Everett lowered his handkerchief, the linen bore a Rorschach blot of red. "Everett." Her fingers brushed his sleeve. He stuffed the cloth away. "Sold to Blackwood Ranch," the auctioneer declared, but Everett was already striding for the exit, Finn scrambling after him. By the time Juliette caught up at the wagon, Everett had Finn by the shoulders. "Tell Jose to move the herd to the north pasture. Don't mention this." "Be but your." "Don't?" Everett's voice cracked like a whip. Then softer, "Go on, pup." The moment Finn disappeared, Everett sagged against the wagon wheel. Up close, Juliette saw what she'd missed, the lavender shadows under his eyes, the way his collar gaped around a throat grown lean. "Consumption?" Her voice barely carried over the cicada's drone. Everett stared at the horizon where thunderheads gathered. "Doc says it's my heart. Weak since scarlet fever when I was 12. He turned his palm up, studying the calluses. 2 years, maybe 3 if I'm lucky." A raindrop struck Juliette's cheek, mingling with the tears she hadn't felt fall. The desk drawer stuck as if the oak itself resisted revealing its secrets. Rain lashed the ranch house windows 3 days later, each gust making the lanterns shudder. Juliette knelt before Everett's roll-top desk, her hair clinging to her neck in the storm's humidity. He'd ridden out at dawn despite her protests, leaving her with strict orders: restock the cellar. Preserve what you can. The drawer screeched when she yanked it, then froze. Beneath the ledger for Blackwood Ranch lay a bundle of letters, each sealed with wax and labeled in Everett's bold hand. For Finn's 16th birthday. For Finn first cattle drive. For Juliette, when the schoolhouse opens. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the last envelope. The wax cracked like a gunshot. "My dearest Juliette, if you're reading this, the children are singing in that schoolroom you dreamed of. Don't weep for me. Every nail you pounded into those walls is a prayer I heard. I've left instructions with the lawyer, The ranch is yours but the piano belongs to Finn. Tell him his real gift is in the... Boots thudded on the porch. Juliette barely had time to wipe her eyes before Everett loomed in the doorway, rainwater sluicing off his duster. His gaze flicked to the open drawer at the letters. For a heartbeat she thought he'd rage. Instead, he crossed to the fireplace and tossed in a sodden packet. From the orphanage. The return address, St. Louis Home for Girls, sent a chill down her spine. The edges had been singed as if Everett had tried to burn it before reconsidering. Inside, a single line, "The piano cannot be returned. It was sold to settle your father's debts." Everett's hands engulfed hers, steadying the paper. "I sent the money anyway." His thumb brushed her wedding band. Some legacy shouldn't be lost. Outside the storm broke. Somewhere in the downpour, Finn hooped as he herded the new heifer into the barn. Juliette pressed her forehead to Everett's chest, breathing in saddle leather and the faint metallic tang of the blood he'd coughed into his bandana. The letters could wait. This, his heartbeat under her ear, the way his arms tightened around her, was the only scripture she needed tonight. The homesteader's wife crossed herself when she saw who stood at her door. Before dawn, Juliette woke to cold sheets and the muffled creak of the stable door. Through the window, she watched Everett saddle his stallion, his movements slower now, deliberate. The medicine bottle on the nightstand, the one Doc Harris had left, was still full. She caught up to him at the edge of the north pasture, her nightgown whipping around her legs in the wind. "Where are you going?" Everett didn't turn. "McAllister Place." The family squatting near Dry Creek? The words tasted bitter. Everyone knew Silas McAllister was a drunk who'd gambled away his land. Everett's gloved hands tightened on the reins. "Wife's sick. Kids haven't eaten in 3 days." A gust carried the scent of impending rain. Juliette touched the back of his hand, feeling the feverish heat even through leather. "Send Jose. You shouldn't be riding." "I owe them." The raw edge in his voice silenced her. The McAllister shack leaned like a drunk against a skeletal cottonwood. Everett dismounted with a grunt, his boots sinking into mud as he hauled a sack of flour from his saddlebag. Inside, a gaunt woman recoiled, pressing 2 hollow-eyed children behind her skirts. "Easy, ma'am." Everett set the flour on their splintered table. "Brought some?" A cough racked him. Blood speckled his chin before he could swipe it away. The youngest child whimpered. Juliette stepped forward, her voice steady. "We've medicine too." She unknotted her apron bundle, the precious vial of willow bark tincture Doc Harris had given them. The woman burst into tears. "Why'd you come yourselves? After Silas tried to." "Water under the bridge." Everett placed a folded paper beside the flour. "A deed. That's 40 acres with creek access. Get your man sober, it'll carry you through." As they rode away, Juliette glimpsed the woman through the shack's warped window, kneeling, the deed pressed to her chest like a prayer book. Everett swayed in the saddle. Juliette grabbed his reins. "You gave them Blackwood land. South Quarter. Never could grow anything there but rocks and regret." His chuckle turned to a wheeze. "Besides, Matthew 6 verse 3. When you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." The first raindrops hit as they crested the ridge. Behind them, smoke curled from the McAllister chimney for the first time in weeks. Finn didn't need to see the blood-stained bandana to know. This drive was different. The herd moved like a living river across the plain, 1,000 longhorns churning dust into a copper haze. At the front, Everett rode straight back despite the pain Juliette saw in every stiff dismount. Finn trotted up beside her, his new rope coiled neat as a sailor's knot. "Mr. Everett's teaching me the lead position today." Pride warred with worry in his voice. Juliette adjusted her hat. "He's teaching you to lead." They both knew what went unspoken, because soon you'll have to. At midday, Everett let Finn take point while he fell back beside Juliette. Sweat darkened his shirt under the arms, but his eyes were clear. "Remember our first drive? You mean when you yelled at me for wearing a dress?" She smiled. "Yelled at Clara for putting you in one." His gloved finger traced her wrist. "Saw you that first morning mucking stalls and petticoats and thought, there's a woman who understands dirt and devotion." A cry went up ahead. Finn had roped a straying steer, his whoop carrying on the wind. Everett's gaze lingered on the boy. "He'll need you more than I did." Juliette's throat burned. "He'll need you in his bones. In every fence post you built, every." Everett kissed her then, hard and desperate, his hat shielding their faces from the men. When he pulled away, his thumb brushed her lower lip. "Tell him that story. The one about the piano." She understood. Not just the music but the why, how she'd crossed half a country to find her place at these keys. As the sun dipped low, painting the herd in gold, Everett called Finn over. "Your turn." He pressed his coiled whip into the boy's hands, the one engraved EB that no one else was allowed to touch. Finn's eyes widened. "But, rule of the drive." Everett's voice carried. "Man with the whip sets the pace." The cowhands cheered as Finn took the lead. Everett hung back, his hand finding Juliette's under the blanket as they rode. The herd moved west toward the dying light, and for a moment, just a moment, she could pretend this trail had no end. The porch swing creaked like a coffin lid in the wind, but Juliette refused to let go of his hand. Golden light bled across the prairie as Juliette pressed a cool cloth to Everett's forehead. The fever had returned with a vengeance after the cattle drive, his skin waxy and damp beneath her fingers. Inside, Finn pretended not to eavesdrop, his shadow stretching long through the screen door as he mended the same bridle for the third hour. Everett's breathing hitched, that wet, rattling sound that made her ribs ache. "Should've built this swing wider," he rasped. Juliette forced a laugh, adjusting the quilt around his shoulders. Says the man who insisted he didn't need help carrying the lumber. A silence settled between them, thick as honey. Fireflies blinked awake in the pasture, their tiny lights mirroring the stars just beginning to pierce the twilight. Everett turned his palm up, revealing the scar from where he'd grabbed Finn's knife all those months ago. "You remember what you told me the night we met? I'm your bride." The words had tasted like desperation then. Now they tasted like home. His thumb brushed her wedding band. "Never got you a proper ring. You got me a life." Her voice broke. Everett's gaze drifted to the horizon where the sun melted into the land. "Finn's got my name. The ranch is yours free and clear. But I need you to promise me something." She braced herself. "Play for me. One last time." Inside, the piano waited. The church pews were full, but the front row sat empty, because no one dared claim the place reserved for a widow and her boy. Black crepe draped the doors of every business in town. Even the saloon had closed, its usual drunkards standing sober-hatted along the cemetery fence. Juliette smoothed Finn's collar, starched stiff as his trembling jaw, as the preacher opened his Bible. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." A rustling at the back. Juliette turned and froze. Silas McAllister stood just inside the door, clean-shaven for the first time in years, his wife clutching his arm. Behind them crowded a dozen others. The old blacksmith Everett had saved from debtor's prison, the Navajo wrangler he'd given winter shelter, even the orphanage director from St. Louis, her gloved hands folded around a bundle of sheet music. Finn whispered, "That's..." Juliette squeezed his hand. "I know." The preacher's voice faltered when he reached the open casket. No one had expected Everett to leave instructions for that, to be displayed in his work clothes, his calloused hands folded over the whip he'd given Finn. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Then from the back a single clear note. The orphanage director had settled at the piano. The opening bars of "Be Thou My Vision," Juliette's wedding song, filled the church. One by one voices joined. The McAllister children. The ranch hands. Even the stooped old bartender. Finn stood abruptly. From his pocket, he drew the EB engraved whip and laid it across Everett's chest. "For the next drive," he choked out. Juliette's tears fell then, hot and silent. Not for the life ended, but for the one Everett had built. A legacy sung in hymns and hoofbeats, written in deeds and dirt, and carried forward by the boy who'd once stolen her locket but now guarded his father's heart with both hands. Outside, a red-tailed hawk circled on the thermals, its shadow gliding over the freshly turned earth. The blackwood herd lowed in the distance. And the wind, the ceaseless Texas wind, carried the music beyond the valley, where the sun still set gold as Everett's last smile. The children's laughter died the moment Juliette stepped into the unfinished schoolhouse, because the desk meant for Everett sat empty by the window. Sawdust hung in the morning light as Juliette ran her fingers over the half-sanded oak desk. Everett had started building it the week after his diagnosis, carving Blackwood Ranch's brand into the corner, AB wrapped in barbed wire. Now it would forever bear the marks of tools never put away. Finn hovered in the doorway, his boots scuffing the threshold. "The roof's on. Jose finished the shingles yesterday." Juliette nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Outside, wagon wheels creaked as families arrived for the dedication. She adjusted the cameo at her throat, Everett's mother's, which he'd given her on their first anniversary, and turned to face the crowd. The McAllister children sat front and center, their cheeks rounder now, their clothes patched but clean. Behind them, Clara dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Even the stooped old postmaster had come, his gnarled hands clutching a brown paper package. Juliette cleared her throat. Everett wanted. Her voice broke. A small hand slipped into hers. Little Ruth McAllister, no older than 6, gazed up with solemn eyes. Ma says Mr. Blackwood's angels now. Angels like music. From the corner, the orphanage director lifted the piano's fallboard. The opening notes of Amazing Grace, the first song Juliette had ever taught Finn, filled the room. One by one voices joined. The rancher's deep baritones. The children's piping sopranos. The wind through the open windows carried the hymn across the pasture where Everett's grave lay beneath the cottonwood. Finn stepped forward, his Adam's apple bobbing. My pa left something. He lifted the desk lid to reveal a stack of primers and a single-sheet music book. Great is thy faithfulness. The postmaster shuffled up, pressing his package into Juliette's hands. Inside lay Everett's worn Bible, a ribbon marking Proverbs 31. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. The school bell rang then, a clear, bright peal that startled a flock of sparrows into flight. Juliette watched them soar, her tears falling freely now. Somewhere she knew Everett was grinning. The starving family's wagon had been camped at Blackwood's border for 3 days before Finn worked up the nerve to approach them. Juliette watched from the porch as her son, though no blood bound them, dismounted beside the battered Conestoga. The man stood protectively in front of his gaunt wife and 2 daughters, their sunbonnets frayed at the edges. Finn removed his hat. "Evening, sir. I'm Finn Blackwood." The man's eyes widened at the name. "We ain't begging. Just resting the horses before moving on." Finn glanced at the youngest girl, who clutched a cornhusk doll missing an arm. "My pa always said this stretch of creek land grows the sweetest hay." He pointed northwest. "There's an empty cabin about a mile yonder. Needs a new hearthstone but the roof's sound." The man stiffened. "We got no money for rent." Finn reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a folded paper. The deed bore the Blackwood brand. "It's yours. Just keep an eye on the schoolhouse for my ma." Juliette's breath caught. The northwest quarter, Everett's favorite fishing spot. As Finn rode back, she met him at the gate. He didn't speak, just handed her a small wooden horse whittled from cottonwood bark, the same kind Everett had carved for him years ago. That night, she found Finn sitting at Everett's desk, tracing the EB brand with his fingertip. "Did I do right?" Juliette kissed his forehead. "Your father's looking down proud." Through the window, lamplight glowed in the distant cabin. The envelope stuck to the bottom of the desk drawer, hidden beneath a false panel only a thief would find. Rain pattered against the schoolhouse windows as Juliette pried up the loose board. The letter inside bore her name in Everett's sprawling hand, "For when you're ready." Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. "My dearest Juliette, if you're reading this, Finn's nearly a man, and you've built that schoolhouse sturdier than my best barn. There's something I need you to know. The day after you arrived, I rode to town to buy your train ticket east. On the way, I passed the creek where you'd washed your only dress. You were kneeling in the water, praying over that little locket of yours. I heard you say, 'Lord, if this is where you want me, help me love him.' That's when I knew, you weren't God's mistake. You were his mercy. There's money in the strongbox for the chapel. Call it Grace Enough. And Juliette? Play our song sometimes. I'll hear it. Yours in this life and the next. Everett." Outside the rain ceased. A shaft of sunlight struck the piano keys, illuminating the sheet music still open from yesterday's lesson. Juliette sat and played Be Thou My Vision, with tears streaming down her face, not for the love lost, but for the love that had planted seeds in barren soil and trusted God to grow them. Somewhere beyond the window, a red-tailed hawk circled. The morning sun through the chapel windows painted Everett's engraved psalm in liquid gold across the Bible's pages. Juliette carefully folded the yellowed advertisement, "Wanted, wife of good character," and tucked it beside the verse he'd marked for her 53 years ago. The paper crackled like autumn leaves, like the sound of wagon wheels on that long-ago day when a nervous rancher had come to meet his prospective bride. "Grandma, look what I found." Juliette turned from gathering eggs to see her grandson Jacob dangling from the hayloft ladder, a pair of tarnished spurs swinging from his grubby fingers. Her breath caught, she'd know that distinctive floral engraving anywhere. Everett spurs. The ones he'd worn every Sunday to church, the ones that had jingled softly when he'd knelt to propose by this very barn. The ones Finn, as a wild-eyed 12-year-old fresh from the orphan train, Had polished every Saturday without being asked after Everett gave him his first real home. "Can I keep him?" Jacob asked, running a finger over the initials EM etched into the leather. Juliette blinked away the memory of Everett teaching Finn to ride, the way the boy had clung to those spurs like holy relics. "They're yours now," she whispered. "Just mind you don't gallop through the house like Finn did." Inside, the parlor piano stood slightly out of tune, just as it had since the day Everett brought it by wagon from St. Louis. Juliette adjusted Ruth's small hands on the keys. "Like this?" The child plinked out blessed assurance, the hymn Finn had played at Everett's funeral, his grown man's hands steady where his childhood ones had fumbled. Juliette could still see them both so clearly, Everett standing behind Finn at this very bench, his work-roughened hands gently correcting their son's fingering. "Again," she told Ruth now, just as Everett had always said to Finn. "Slow and sure wins the race." At twilight, Juliette walked to the baptismal creek where Everett had first truly seen her, not as the mail-order bride he'd expected, but as Juliette, praying with her face turned up to the morning sun. He'd confessed years later how he'd watched from the cottonwoods, certain in that moment he'd marry her. Now she knelt in the same spot, her knees protesting in the damp grass. The water murmured past, carrying with it decades of memories, Finn's baptism here at 14, his wedding here at 22, Everett's ashes scattered here last spring. A bullfrog croaked. Juliette smiled. Everett had hated their racket. Finn had loved imitating them to make her laugh. Back home, Juliette lit the lantern and opened the family Bible. The advertisement slipped free, that foolish, brave notice that had brought her a love stronger than she'd dared dream. She touched Everett's engraved psalm, then turned to the back page where Finn had scrawled his last composition, for Ma and Pa, just months before the fever took him too soon. Outside, Ruth's laughter floated up with the fireflies as Jacob's spurs jingled across the porch. The sounds wove together, past and present, memory and living breath. Juliette closed the Bible and blew out the light. Some loves she knew never faded. Some families, though patched together from lonely ads and orphan trains, never really ended. And somewhere beyond the stars she could almost hear it, the rich baritone and the off-key tenor harmonizing on their favorite hymn as the screen door banged shut behind the next generation. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button to let me know you loved this story. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an uplifting Christian romance. Share this video with a friend who needs hope, or anyone who loves clean, emotional love stories. Comment below, what was your favorite moment?